Quan Ho pressed his face against the cold metal wall of the engine room and tried to forget the laughter echoing from the mess hall above. The sound reached him even here, 3 levels down in the belly of the starship New Horizon. He knew they were laughing about him again. The young human engineer wiped grease from his hands with an old cloth. Around him, the massive engines hummed with the power that pushed their ship between the stars. These engines were his world now. Down here, nobody called him weak. Down here, nobody reminded him that humans were the newest species in the galaxy. Down here, he could work in peace. But peace never lasted long on the New Horizon. "There you are, Dirt Walker." The voice belonged to Thex, one of the Valak warriors who served as security on the ship. The tall, blue-skinned alien ducked through the doorway, his 4 arms crossed over his broad chest. "Captain wants to see your report on the engine modifications." Quan Ho reached for a data pad on his workbench. His hands shook slightly as he handed it over. "The efficiency improvements are all documented. Fuel consumption is down by 12%, and power output increased by 8%. Thex glanced at the pad without really reading it. "More human tinkering. When will you learn that some things should not be touched by primitive hands?" The words stung, but Quan Ho had heard worse. "The modifications work. The numbers prove it. Numbers mean nothing if the ship explodes." Thex tossed the pad back onto the workbench. "The Valak have been traveling between stars for 3,000 years. We know what works and what does not. Humans have been in space for what? 200 years. You are children playing with tools you do not understand." Quan Ho felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Those modifications could save us days of travel time. They could save fuel that might keep us alive if we get stranded. Or they could kill us all." Thex turned to leave, then paused. "The captain will review your report. But do not expect miracles, Dirt Walker. We all know what humans are good for, and it is not engineering." The Valak warrior left, and silence returned to the engine room. But the silence felt different now. It felt heavy and angry. Quan Ho had joined the crew of the New Horizon 6 months ago, fresh from the engineering academy on Earth. He had been so excited. This was humanity's first major deep space research mission alongside other species. He thought it would be his chance to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Instead, it had become 6 months of constant reminders that he was not welcome. Chither. Other species on the ship tolerated humans because they had to. The Galactic Council had ordered it. But tolerance was not the same as acceptance. The Valak thought humans were weak and primitive. The Nethys, with their large brains and pale skin, considered humans intellectually inferior. Even the friendly Zori, who looked almost like humans except for their silver eyes, treated him like a curious pet. Only one person on the ship treated him with real respect. "Quan Ho?" Dr. Bo-Ram's voice came from the doorway. She was the ship's xenobiologist and the only other human in the science department. "I brought you some food." She entered carrying a tray with real Earth food, not the bland ship rations. Quan Ho smiled for the first time that day. "You did not have to do that. I know you skip meals when you are working." Bo-Ram set the tray down and looked around the engine room. "Still hiding down here?" "I am not hiding. I am working." "Right." She sat on a tool crate and watched him eat. "What did Thex want?" "To remind me that humans are primitive dirt walkers who should not touch important things." Bo-Ram sighed. "You know he is wrong, right? Your modifications are brilliant. I have seen the reports. Even the Nethys engineers are impressed. though they will never admit it. Then why does everyone treat me like I am going to break something? Because they are scared. Quan Ho looked up from his food. Scared? Of me? Not of you, personally. Scared of what you represent. Bo-Ram leaned forward. Humans do things differently. We solve problems in ways they never thought of. That makes them uncomfortable. Change always makes people uncomfortable. So I should just accept being treated like garbage? No. But you should remember that proving them wrong is the best revenge. She stood and moved toward the door. Speaking of which, we will be reaching Kethvar in 2 days. You should prepare yourself. Quan Ho had heard whispers about Kethvar. It was a world ruled by the Cathani, a species of hunters and warriors. The New Horizon was going there to establish a research station, but the Cathani did not welcome visitors easily. What do you mean, prepare myself? Bo-Ram paused in the doorway. The Cathani respect strength above all else. They will test us, all of us, and I have a feeling that test will not be easy for any human. After she left, Quan Ho returned to his work. He tried to focus on the engines, but his mind kept wandering to Kethvar. He had read about the Cathani in the ship's database. They were tall, powerful beings with dark skin marked by ritual scars. Their entire culture revolved around hunting and proving one's worth through combat. What kind of test would such people give to the crew of a research ship? Hours passed as Quan Ho worked on the engines. He adjusted power flows, replaced worn components, and ran diagnostic tests. The work calmed his mind and helped him forget the cruel words and mocking laughter. Here, surrounded by humming machinery and blinking displays, he felt useful. He felt like he belonged, but belonging was an illusion that could be shattered easily. "What is this?" Captain Zoral's voice boomed through the engine room. The Nethys commander had arrived with his chief engineer, another Nethys named Crix. Both of them stared at Quan Ho's modifications with obvious displeasure. "Efficiency improvements to the main drive system," Quan Ho said, standing up straight. "As documented in my report." "Unauthorized modifications," Crix corrected. "You have altered critical systems without proper approval. I followed all safety protocols. The modifications are completely safe and improve performance significantly." Captain Zoral's large, pale head tilted to one side as he studied the engine readings. "The numbers do show improvement. But these changes were not approved by the Engineering Council. Because the Council would have rejected them without testing," Quan Ho said, his frustration finally boiling over. "They reject everything humans suggest because we are primitive and inexperienced. How are we supposed to prove ourselves if nobody will let us try?" "By following proper procedures," Crix snapped, "not by performing unauthorized experiments on critical ship systems. These are not experiments. They are proven improvements based on solid engineering principles, human engineering principles," Captain Zoral said quietly, "which may not apply to non-human technology." The words hit Quan Ho like a physical blow. Even when the evidence was right in front of them, they still could not accept that a human might have something valuable to contribute. "I see," Quan Ho said, his voice barely above a whisper. "So, even when I am right, I am still wrong because I am human." Captain Zoral's expression softened slightly. "That is not what I said." "It is exactly what you said." Quan Ho turned back to his workbench. "Will there be anything else, Captain?" The silence stretched for several seconds before Captain Zoral spoke again. "Reverse the modifications. Return the engines to their original configuration." "That will, reduce efficiency, and waste fuel. It will ensure the safety of this ship and crew. Those are my priorities. After they left, Quan Ho stood alone among the engines he had worked so hard to improve. Soon he would have to undo all his work, return everything to the way it was before. Because his ideas, no matter how good, would never be good enough. He was just a human after all, and humans, it seemed, would never truly belong among the stars. The red sun of Kethvar cast everything in blood-colored light as the new horizon settled into orbit around the hunter world. Quan Ho stood at the observation deck window, watching the planet slowly turn below them. From space, it looked beautiful. Rolling forests of crimson trees stretched between jagged mountain ranges. Rivers carved silver lines through valleys that seemed to glow in the strange light. But Quan Ho knew that beauty could be deadly. Magnificent, is it not? Dr. Boram joined him at the window. The preliminary scans show incredible biodiversity. Over 3,000 species of predators documented so far. 3,000? Quan Ho felt his stomach tighten. That seems like a lot. Kethvar is a death world. Only the strongest survive here. That is why the Kethani became such skilled hunters. They had to be, or they would have gone extinct long ago. Through the ship's communication system, Captain Zorel's voice echoed across all decks. All senior staff report to the main conference room immediately. We have received a transmission from the planetary government. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy when Quan Ho arrived. Representatives from each species sat at the large circular table. The Valak warriors looked confident as always. The Nethys scholars appeared calm and calculating. The silver-eyed Zori whispered among themselves in their musical language. Only the humans seemed worried. Captain Zorel activated the main display screen. The image showed a massive Kethani warrior with dark skin covered in ritual scars. His eyes burned like coals in his weathered face, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. I am War Chief Drakthul, leader of the northern clans. You seek to build a research station on our world. This request has been considered by the Council of Hunters. The alien paused, and Quan Ho noticed how even the proud Valak warriors shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. Many voices spoke against allowing outsiders to walk our sacred hunting grounds. They said strangers would bring weakness and dishonor to Kethvar. Others argued that new knowledge might strengthen our people. Drakthul's scarred face showed no emotion. The council has decided to test your worthiness. Captain Zorel leaned forward. What kind of test? The trial of claws. Each species aboard your vessel must send one representative to prove their worth in the wilderness of Kethvar. They will face the same challenges our own young hunters must overcome to earn their place among the clans. Those who succeed will be granted the right to establish their research station. Those who fail... Drakthul smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to sharp points. Will feed the creatures of the forest. Silence filled the conference room. Even the confident Valak looked uncertain now. How long do we have to prepare? Asked Commander Thex. Your representatives will be transported to the surface at dawn tomorrow. The trial begins immediately upon arrival. Each must survive alone for 7 days in the Crimson Forest. They may bring only basic survival gear and one personal weapon. No advanced technology, no communication devices, no help from others. Doctor, Boram raised her hand. What if someone is injured during the trial? Then they learn whether they are strong enough to heal themselves, or whether they deserve to die. Drakthul's expression remained cold. These are the same rules our children follow. We make no exceptions for outsiders. After the transmission ended, the room erupted in urgent discussions. Each species began planning immediately. The Valak chose their champion, a scarred warrior named Gorthak, who had fought in a dozen border wars. The Nethys selected their best. Survival expert, a scholar named Vexen, who had studied wilderness tactics for centuries. The Zori picked their scout leader, a female named Sil-Ara, who could track prey across any terrain. Then all eyes turned to the humans. Well? Captain Zorl looked at Dr. Boram. Who will represent humanity? Boram glanced around the table. She was brilliant, but she was a scientist, not a warrior. The only other humans on the ship were technicians and support staff. None of them had any combat training or wilderness experience. I will do it, Quan Ho said quietly. The room fell silent. Several aliens actually laughed. You? Thex shook his head. The engine worker? This is not a joke, human. Someone will actually die down there. I volunteer, Quan Ho repeated, louder this time. I will represent humanity in the trial. Absolutely not, Captain Zorl said firmly. Dr. Boram is our senior human representative. If anyone goes, it should be her. No. Boram stood up. Quan Ho is right. I am a xenobiologist, not a survivor. I would be dead within hours. But Quan Ho? She looked at him with something like pride. Quan Ho thinks differently than the rest of us. He sees solutions where others see only problems. He sees nothing but the inside of an engine room, Vexen said dismissively. This trial requires real skills, hunting, fighting, survival in hostile terrain. What does a human engineer know about such things? Maybe we should find out, Quan Ho said, surprising himself with his own boldness. Unless you would prefer to tell the Cathani that humans are too weak to even attempt their trial. The insult hit its mark. Captain Zorl's large eyes narrowed. Very well, but understand that this decision may doom our entire mission. If you fail, we all fail. I understand. That night, Quan Ho could not sleep. He spent hours in the ship's database, reading everything he could find about Kethvar and its dangers. The planet was home to creatures that seemed designed specifically to kill anything that moved. Razor-spine prowlers hunted in packs, using coordinated attacks to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Shadow stalkers could blend perfectly with their surroundings, becoming invisible until the moment they struck. Void hunters were massive predators that could sense fear from miles away. And those were just the common threats. The database hinted at much worse things lurking in the deep forests and mountain caves. Dr. Boram found him in the research lab at 3 in the morning, still reading survival manuals and studying biological data. You should be resting, she said softly. I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those creatures tearing me apart. She sat down beside him. Are you having second thoughts? Every second. Quan Ho rubbed his tired eyes. But what choice do I have? If I back out now, they will never let humans participate in anything important again. We will always be the species that was too scared to even try. And if you die down there? Then at least I die trying to prove that humans are not weak. He looked at her seriously. Will you do something for me? Of course. If I do not come back, make sure they remember that a human volunteered. Make sure they know we are not cowards. Boram was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. This is a personal beacon. It will not work for communication, but it will record everything that happens to you. If the worst occurs, at least we will know how you fought. Quan Ho took the device and clipped it to his jacket. Thank you. There is something else. She hesitated. I have been studying the Cathani culture. They respect courage above all other virtues. Even if you fail the trial, if you face death bravely, they will honor your memory. That might be enough to earn humanity some respect. So my best hope is to die heroically. Your best hope is to survive. But if that is not possible, she squeezed his shoulder. Show them what humans are truly made of. Dawn came too quickly. Quan Ho stood in the transport bay with the other representatives, wearing basic survival gear and carrying a simple knife as his personal weapon. The other volunteers looked calm and confident. Gorthak sharpened his ceremonial battle axe. Vexen checked his survival kit one final time. Silara stretched like a cat, preparing to hunt. Quan Ho just tried not to throw up. The transport ship descended through Kethvar's atmosphere, and the red forests grew larger below them. Soon he would be down there alone, facing creatures that had evolved to be perfect killers. He thought about the laughter in the mess hall, the dismissive words, the constant reminders that humans did not belong among the stars. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was about to prove just how weak and primitive humans really were, but he was going to find out. The forest floor felt wrong under Quan Ho's feet. The crimson leaves were too soft, like they were hiding something dangerous beneath. Every step made a wet, squelching sound that seemed to echo through the twisted trees. The red sunlight filtered down through the canopy, casting everything in an eerie, blood-colored glow. Quan Ho had been walking for 3 hours since the transport dropped him off. Already he could hear things moving in the shadows around him. Branches cracked. Leaves rustled without any wind. Sometimes he caught glimpses of yellow eyes watching him from the darkness between the trees. He stopped beside a fallen log and checked his supplies. One water bottle, already half empty, a small pack of emergency rations that would last maybe 2 days if he was careful, basic survival gear including a fire starter, some rope, and a thermal blanket. His knife, which felt pathetically small compared to the weapons the other representatives had carried. Most importantly, he had his engineering mind. That would have to be enough. A low growl made him freeze. Something large was moving through the undergrowth about 50 meters to his left. Quan Ho pressed himself against a tree trunk and tried to become invisible. Through the crimson vegetation, he could see a creature the size of a small bear, but covered in metallic scales that reflected the red light like mirrors. Its head turned slowly from side to side, sniffing the air. Quan Ho held his breath until the creature moved away. Only then did he notice that his hands were shaking. He had studied the database files, but seeing a real Kethvar predator was completely different. These things were not just animals. They were living weapons, shaped by millions of years of evolution into perfect killing machines. How was he supposed to survive 7 days among creatures like that? Quan Ho forced himself to start walking again. Standing still would not help him survive. He needed to find water, shelter, and some way to defend himself. The knife would be useless against most of the predators on this world. He needed something better. The forest around him was alien but followed certain patterns. The largest trees grew near water sources. The ground was softer in some areas, which meant underground streams. The predators used game trails, just like animals on Earth. If he could learn to read these patterns, maybe he could avoid the worst dangers. Or maybe he was just delaying the inevitable. Something was following him. Quan Ho first noticed it after his 4th hour in the forest. A shadow that moved when he moved, stopped when he stopped. He never saw it directly, but he could feel eyes watching his every step. The sensation made his skin crawl. He tried changing direction several times, but the shadow always followed. Whatever was tracking him was patient and skilled, much more skilled than he was. As the red sun began to set, painting the forest in even deeper shades of crimson, Quan Ho found a small clearing beside a stream. The water was clear and cold, which meant it was probably safe to drink. The clearing was surrounded by thick trees that would provide some protection from the wind, but it would also trap him if something attacked. Quan Ho gathered fallen branches and built a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trees around him, making everything look alive and threatening. He ate a small portion of his rations and tried to plan his next move. That was when he saw the eyes. Two glowing orbs watched him from the darkness, beyond the firelight. They were set wide apart, suggesting a large head, and they were completely motionless, like the creature was carved from stone. Quan Ho's hand moved slowly toward his knife. The eyes followed the movement. "I know you are. There," he said quietly, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "You have been following me all day." The eyes blinked once, slowly. "Are you going to kill me? Or are you just curious about the strange human?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the creature stepped into the firelight. Quan Ho's breath caught in his throat. The being was clearly Cathani, but unlike any he had seen in the database files. This one was huge, even by Cathani standards, standing nearly 8 feet tall. His dark skin was covered in more ritual scars than Quan Ho could count, creating intricate patterns across his arms and chest. His face was weathered like old leather, and his eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from decades of hunting. The deadliest prey in the galaxy. This was not just a Cathani. This was a legend. "I am Veltar," the hunter said in accented but clear standard. His voice was deep and gravelly, like rocks grinding together. "I am here to watch you die." "Oh." Quan Ho swallowed hard. "That is honest, I suppose. The Council of Hunters sent me to observe each of the representatives during their trials, to ensure they face their challenges alone, without outside help." Veltar sat down cross-legged on the opposite side of the fire. "Most observers remain hidden, but you interest me, small human." "Why?" "Because you should be dead already, yet you still live." Veltar studied him with those burning eyes. "The Zori female was killed by shadow stalkers 3 hours after landing." The Nethys scholar fell into a razorvine trap before sunset. "Only the Valak warrior still survives, and he has the strength of 10 normal beings." Quan Ho felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "The others are dead?" "The forest takes what it will take. You cannot change that." Veltar poked at the fire with a long stick. "But you move through the forest like you understand it. You chose this clearing because the stream provides escape routes in 3 directions. You built your fire small enough to avoid attracting major predators, but large enough to keep the smaller ones away. You check the wind direction before each decision. I am just trying not to die. Many try not to die. Few succeed in the Crimson Forest." The Cathani hunter leaned forward. "Tell me, human, what do you see when you look at this place?" Quan Ho glanced around the dark forest. "I see a system, predators and prey, water sources and shelter, energy flows and resource distribution. Everything here follows patterns, just like any other complex system. You see the forest as a machine, not a machine, a living system. But systems can be understood. They can be influenced. Veltar was quiet for several minutes, just staring into the flames. Finally, he spoke again. Tomorrow you will face the razor spine prowlers. They hunt in packs of 6 to 8. They are fast, intelligent, and they coordinate their attacks better than most military units. How will you survive them? I do not know yet. The Valak warrior plans to fight them with strength and fury. It is a good plan for his kind. But you are not Valak. You are not strong enough to defeat 8 prowlers in direct combat. Then I will have to find another way. What other way could there be? Quan Ho thought about it. On my world, we have a saying. If you cannot be stronger than your enemy, be smarter. And if you cannot be smarter, change the rules of the game. Something that might have been a smile crossed Veltar's scarred face. Interesting philosophy. We will see if it keeps you alive tomorrow. The Cathani hunter stood and began to walk back into the darkness. Then he paused and looked back. Human. What is your name? Quan Ho. Quan Ho. Veltar pronounced it carefully, like he was tasting the sounds. Sleep well, Quan Ho of the humans. Tomorrow will test whether your philosophy has any value in the real world. After the hunter disappeared into the shadows, Quan Ho sat alone by his small fire. Around him, the forest was alive with sounds, howls in the distance, the rustle of something large moving through the trees, the splash of a predator taking prey at the stream. He was going to face razor-spine prowlers tomorrow, pack hunters that could coordinate better than military units, and he had nothing but a knife and his engineering mind to protect him. But as he stared into the dying flames, an idea began to form. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It would probably get him killed. But it might also work. Quan Ho pulled out his survival gear and began to plan. If Veltar was right about the prowlers hunting in coordinated packs, then maybe he could use that coordination against them. After all, the best systems could always be turned into the worst traps. You just had to know which buttons to push. Dawn came with the sound of hunting calls echoing through the crimson forest. Quan Ho woke from uneasy sleep to find his fire had died to cold ashes. Around him, the morning mist hung between the trees like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in that mist, the razor-spine prowlers were moving. He could hear them communicating with each other. Short, sharp barks that seemed to come from all directions at once. They were surrounding him, just as Veltar had predicted. Quan Ho gathered his gear quickly and began moving toward the stream. His plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. Pack hunters relied on coordination and communication. If he could disrupt that coordination, maybe he could survive long enough to escape. The first prowler appeared when he was halfway to the water. It stepped out from behind a twisted tree trunk, and Quan Ho got his first close look at one of Kethvar's most efficient killers. The creature was about the size of a large wolf, but built for pure speed and violence. Metallic spines ran along. Its back and legs, each one sharp enough to cut through steel. Its head was elongated like a crocodile's, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. But the most frightening thing was its eyes. They held intelligence. This was not just a beast acting. On instinct, this was a thinking predator. The prowler tilted its head and made a soft clicking sound. Immediately, answering clicks came from the forest around Quan Ho. He was completely surrounded. "Hello there," Quan Ho said quietly, his hand moving slowly. toward the device he had built during the night. "I suppose you are hungry." The prowler crouched lower, preparing to spring. That was when Quan Ho activated his makeshift sound projector. The device was crude but effective. He had used parts from his survival kit to create a small speaker that could mimic the prowler's communication sounds. But instead of normal hunting calls, it broadcast the distress signal of a wounded prowler at maximum volume. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Every prowler in the pack responded to what they thought was a pack member in mortal danger. They came crashing through the undergrowth from all directions, converging on Quan Ho's position in a confused mass of snapping jaws and slashing spines. But they were no longer coordinated. They were panicked and confused, getting in each other's way as they tried to reach their supposedly wounded packmate. In the chaos, Quan Ho rolled to one side and sprinted toward the stream. Behind him, the prowlers realized they had been tricked. Their angry howls filled the forest as they gave chase. Quan Ho reached the stream and dove into the cold water without hesitation. The current was stronger than he had expected, and it swept him downstream toward a series of rapids. Sharp rocks scraped his arms and legs as he was tumbled along, but he could hear the prowlers running along the bank, trying to keep up. The water carried him around a bend and over a small waterfall. He crashed into a deep pool at the bottom, gasping and choking. When he finally pulled himself onto the far bank, he was bruised and bleeding, but alive. The prowlers had lost his scent in the water. Their frustrated howls grew fainter as they searched for another way across the stream. Quan Ho allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to rest before he started moving again. The sound projector trick would only work once. Next time, the prowlers would be ready for his deception. He followed the stream deeper into the forest, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the pack hunters. The water provided a clear path through the dense undergrowth, and it masked his scent from other predators, but it also led him into new dangers. The scream came from somewhere ahead, echoing off the canyon walls where the stream cut through a rocky gorge. It was not the cry of a predator making a kill, it was the sound of something in terrible pain. Quan Ho climbed up the canyon wall to get a better view. What he saw made his blood freeze. Veltar was trapped. The mighty Cathani hunter was pinned beneath a fallen tree in a narrow section of the gorge. His left leg was clearly broken, twisted at an impossible angle. Blood soaked the ground around him. And stalking back and forth just out of his reach was the largest predator Quan Ho had seen yet. The creature was called a void stalker, according to the database files. It stood nearly 10 feet tall on 4 powerful legs, with armored skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its head was mostly mouth, filled with teeth the size of daggers. But the most terrifying thing about void stalkers was their intelligence. They liked to play with wounded prey before killing it. The stalker would dart forward, snapping at Veltar with its massive jaws, then retreat when the hunter tried to defend himself with his ceremonial spear. It was enjoying the game, drawing out the hunter's death for its own amusement. Quan Ho crouched behind a boulder and tried to think. This was not his problem. Veltar was here to watch him die, not to help him. The smart thing would be to sneak away and let the Cathani hunter face his fate alone. But he could not do it. Maybe it was because Veltar had treated him with more respect than anyone else on this mission. Maybe it was because leaving someone to die like this felt wrong, even if that someone was supposed to be his enemy. Or maybe it was because he was tired of being seen as weak and cowardly. Whatever the reason, Quan Ho began working his way down, into the gorge. He moved carefully, using the rocky walls for cover. The Void Stalker was so focused on its trapped prey that it did not notice the small human approaching from behind. Quan Ho got within 20 meters before he had to stop. Any closer, and the creature would sense him. The plan that formed in his mind was probably suicide, but it was the only chance either of them had. Quan Ho pulled out his remaining emergency rations and began spreading them around the gorge floor. The concentrated food packets had a strong smell that would attract scavengers. Then he used his fire starter to create several small blazes among the dry vegetation along the canyon walls. The Void Stalker noticed the smoke first. Its massive head swung around, searching for the source of the disturbance. That was when Quan Ho lit his final surprise. He had used parts from his survival kit to create an improvised explosive device. It was not much more than a loud firecracker, but in the narrow confines of the gorge, the sound was deafening. The explosion echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and the flash of light temporarily blinded everything in the area. The Void Stalker spun around in confusion, looking for this new threat. Its massive tail lashed out wildly, smashing against the rocky walls. In its panic, it stepped directly into one of Quan Ho's small fires. The creature's roar of pain and fury shook loose rocks from the canyon walls. It began attacking everything around it, snapping at shadows and clawing at the stone. In its blind rage, it backed directly into the narrow gap where Veltar was trapped. The gap was too small for the Void Stalker's massive body. It became wedged between the rocks, thrashing desperately as Quan Ho had hoped it would. That was when he made his move. Quan Ho sprinted across the gorge floor and began pulling at the fallen tree that pinned Veltar. The wood was heavy and slick, with blood, but desperation gave him strength he did not know he had. Human. Veltar's voice was weak but urgent. What are you doing here? Saving your life, apparently. Quan Ho braced his feet against a rock and pulled harder. Unless you would prefer to be eaten by that thing. The tree shifted slightly. Veltar gritted his teeth and pushed with his good leg, trying to free himself. Behind them, the Void Stalker was still trapped, but fighting to get loose. Soon it would either break free or bring down the entire canyon wall. There! The tree rolled away, and Veltar pulled his broken leg free. Can you walk? Not walk. But I can move. The Cathani hunter grabbed his spear and used it as a crutch. We must leave this place. Now! They helped each other climb out of the gorge just as the Void Stalker finally broke free. Its enraged roars followed them as they limped away through the forest. But the creature was too large to pursue them through the thick trees. When they finally stopped to rest, Veltar looked at Quan Ho with something like wonder in his eyes. You came back for me? Yes. Why? I am here to watch you die. I am not your ally. Quan Ho thought about it. Because leaving you there would have been wrong. And because... He paused, surprised by his own words. Because I think you are the first person in a long time who has not treated me like I am worthless. Veltar was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more respectful. On Kethvar, we have a saying, blood shared in battle makes brothers of strangers. He reached out and clasped Quan Ho's shoulder with his massive hand. You have honored me today, Quan Ho of the humans. I will not forget this debt. As they continued through the Crimson Forest together, Quan Ho realized something had changed. He was no longer alone in this deadly place. He had found something he had never expected to find among the stars. He had found a friend. For 2 days, Quan Ho and Veltar moved through the Crimson Forest together. The Cathani hunter's broken leg slowed them down, but his knowledge of the wilderness kept them alive. He showed Quan Ho which plants were safe to eat, which water sources to avoid, and how to read the subtle signs that warned of approaching predators. In return, Quan Ho used his engineering skills to help them survive in ways that amazed the ancient hunter. He built simple machines from forest materials, pulleys to help Veltar climb steep slopes, levers to move heavy obstacles, and filters to purify questionable water. Each device was crude but effective, solving problems that brute strength alone could not handle. "Your people think very differently than mine," Veltar said as they rested beside a hidden spring on the 3rd day. He was examining a water purification system that Quan Ho had built from hollow reeds, sand, and charcoal. "We see a problem and ask, how can I be strong enough to overcome it? You see the same problem and ask, how can I make the problem solve itself? Different approaches for different people," Quan Ho replied, checking the hunter's leg wound. The break was healing well, but Veltar would walk with a limp for weeks. "Your way works when you have the strength of 10 normal beings. My way works when you do not. Both ways have value." Veltar was quiet for a moment. "My people have not always understood this." There was something in the hunter's voice that made Quan Ho look up from his work. "What do you mean?" Veltar stared into the forest, his scarred face troubled. "I was not always an observer of trials. Once I was the greatest hunter of my generation. I led war parties against our enemies. I brought down creatures that other hunters feared to face. The Council of Hunters spoke my name with respect and awe. What changed? I showed mercy. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Veltar had never told this story to an outsider before, Quan Ho realized. Maybe he had never told it to anyone. "We were hunting a group of raiders who had attacked one of our settlements," Veltar continued. "They were Zori, I think, though. It does not matter. When we cornered them, they surrendered. They threw down their weapons and begged for their lives. And you let them live?" "I let them live." Veltar's voice was heavy with old pain. "It was a mistake, according to the council. They said I had shown weakness. That mercy was a disease that would spread if not cut out immediately. They took away my command and made me an observer instead. Now I watch others prove their worth while I can never prove mine again." Quan Ho felt a strange kinship with the massive alien. "So we are both outcasts." "Yes. You because your people think you are too weak. Me because my people think I am too soft." Veltar managed a bitter smile. "Perhaps that is why we understand each other." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made them both freeze. Somewhere in the distance, something was roaring with a voice like thunder. The sound went on, echoing through the forest until the very trees seemed to shake. "Stormworm," Veltar whispered. Quan Ho felt ice form in his stomach. He had read about storm worms in the database. They were the apex predators of Kethvar, creatures so dangerous that even the bravest Cathani hunters avoided them. They were nearly 50 feet long, with armored hide that could turn aside the sharpest blades. Their breath was pure electricity, capable of frying anything within 100 meters. "How far away?" Quan Ho asked. "Too close. We must move immediately." They gathered their supplies and began moving as quickly as Veltar's injured leg would allow. But the roars kept getting closer. Whatever had attracted the storm worm's attention was in the same direction they needed to travel. As they crested a small hill, they saw the source of the disturbance. In the valley below, the last surviving representative from the New Horizon was making his final stand. Gorthak the Valak warrior stood in a clearing beside a rocky outcrop, his ceremonial battle axe in his hands. Around him lay the bodies of at least 6 shadow stalkers, their dark blood staining the crimson earth. But Gorthak was badly wounded, and advancing toward him across the clearing was the storm worm. The creature was even more terrifying in person than in the database files. Its snake-like body was covered in scales that crackled with electrical energy. Its head was the size of a small vehicle, and sparks danced between its teeth as it prepared to unleash its deadly breath. "He cannot win," Veltar said quietly. "No single warrior can defeat a storm worm alone." "Then we have to help him." Veltar grabbed Quan Ho's arm. "That is not permitted. Each representative must face the trial alone. If we interfere, we will all be disqualified. And if we do nothing, he dies. Many die in the trials. That is the way of Kethvar." Quan Ho looked at the Cathani hunter with new understanding. "Is that what you told yourself when your people cast you out? That mercy was weakness? That letting others die was just the way things were?" Veltar's grip loosened. In his eyes, Quan Ho could see the same conflict that had destroyed the hunter's career years ago. Honor demanded that he follow the rules, but conscience demanded that he save a life. "If we help him, my people will never accept me again," Veltar said. "And if we do not help him, you will never accept yourself again." The storm worm reared back, electricity building in its throat. In seconds, it would unleash a blast that would reduce Gorthak to ash and bone. Veltar made his choice. "What do you need me to do?" Quan Ho's mind raced. The storm worm was too large and too well-armored to fight directly. But every creature had weaknesses, and every system could be exploited. "The electrical discharge," he said suddenly. "It has to build up before release, right? Like a capacitor charging." "I do not understand your words, but yes. The creature gathers energy before it strikes. Then we need to make it discharge that energy somewhere else." Quan Ho pulled out his remaining wire and began working frantically. "I need you to get Gorthak's attention. Make him move toward those metal deposits in the rocks." "The iron ore? Why?" "Because metal conducts electricity better than flesh." Veltar understood immediately. Despite his broken leg, he began climbing down into the valley, moving from tree to tree to avoid the storm worm's notice. When he was close enough, he gave the traditional Cathani hunting call. Gorthak's head snapped around in surprise. He saw Veltar gesturing toward the rocky outcrop and nodded understanding. The Valak warrior began backing toward the metal rich rocks, keeping his axe raised defensively. Meanwhile, Quan Ho was creating the most important device of his life. Using wire from his survival kit, metal components from his gear, and his own belt buckle, he built a crude but functional lightning rod. Then he began the most dangerous climb of his life. The storm worm was focused entirely on Gorthak now, following the retreating warrior toward the rocks. Electricity crackled around its massive head as it prepared to strike. Quan Ho had maybe 30 seconds before it fired. He scrambled up the rocky outcrop, his makeshift lightning rod clutched in one hand. The iron ore deposits were clearly visible in the stone, dark veins of metal that ran deep into the hillside. If his calculations were correct, they would provide a perfect ground for electrical discharge. The storm worm opened its mouth, and Quan Ho could see energy building in its throat like a miniature sun. He jammed his lightning rod into the largest deposit of iron ore he could find, then grabbed the conducting wire and began wrapping it around himself. He was about to turn his own body into part of the electrical circuit. If he had made any mistakes in his calculations, the discharge would kill him instantly. The storm worm fired. A bolt of pure lightning erupted from its mouth, aimed directly at Gorthak. But the electrical energy took the path of least resistance, flowing toward Quan Ho's lightning rod instead. The bolt struck the metal device and flowed through the wire into the iron deposits below. Quan Ho felt the electricity pass through his body like liquid fire. Every nerve screamed in agony as thousands of volts coursed through him. His vision went white, and he could smell his own hair burning. But he was still alive. The iron ore had grounded most of the electrical energy safely into the earth. The storm worm, suddenly drained of its primary weapon, looked around in confusion. It had never encountered prey that could redirect its lightning before. That confusion gave Gorthak the opening he needed. The Valak warrior charged forward with a battle cry that shook the valley. His ceremonial axe, enhanced by residual electrical energy from the lightning strike, cut through the storm worm's armored hide like it was paper. The creature fell with a crash that could be heard for miles. When the dust settled, Gorthak stood victorious over the greatest predator on Kethvar. But his eyes were not on his fallen enemy. They were on the small human who had collapsed on the rocky outcrop above, smoke still rising from his burned clothing. Veltar reached Quan Ho first, his broken leg forgotten in his haste to help his friend. The hunter's massive hands were gentle as he checked for signs of life. "Quan Ho? Can you hear me?" Quan Ho opened his eyes slowly. Everything hurt, and he was pretty sure some of his hair had been permanently removed. But he was alive. Did it work? It worked. Veltar's voice was filled with something that might have been awe. "You turned yourself into a lightning rod to save us all." "Engineering," Quan Ho croaked. "It is all about understanding the system." The journey back to the Cathani settlement took 2 days. Quan Ho's burns were healing slowly, and Veltar's broken leg made their progress difficult. But Gorthak proved to be a reliable companion. The Valak warrior carried supplies and helped them navigate the most dangerous parts of the forest. As they walked, news of their victory over the storm worm spread ahead of them. Cathani scouts had witnessed the battle from a distance, and their reports flew from settlement to settlement, faster than the 3 survivors could travel. By the time they reached the main village, crowds of hunters had gathered to see the unlikely heroes. The settlement was carved into the side of a mountain, with stone buildings that looked like they had grown from the rock itself. Banners hung from tall poles, displaying the clan symbols of the northern tribes. In the center of the village stood the Great Hall, where War Chief Drakthul held court. As they approached the hall, Quan Ho could see hundreds of Cathani warriors lining the path. Their scarred faces showed curiosity, respect, and in some cases, suspicion. They had heard the stories, but seeing the small human who had supposedly defeated a storm worm was clearly difficult to believe. "Remember," Veltar said quietly as they walked, "speak with confidence. Show no weakness. My people respect strength above all else. What if they do not believe the story? Then we will have bigger problems than your trial." The Great Hall was a massive chamber carved from living rock. Torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows on ancient carvings that told the history of Cathani victories. At the far end, War Chief Drakthul sat on a throne made from the bones of defeated creatures. His scarred face was unreadable as the three survivors approached. "So," Drakthul's voice echoed through the hall, "the trials are complete. Only 3 return from the 5 who entered our sacred hunting grounds." His burning eyes fixed on Quan Ho. "And one of them is the human, who was not expected to survive the first day." Murmurs rippled through the assembled warriors. Quan Ho could feel hundreds of eyes studying him, measuring him, trying to understand how such a small and seemingly weak creature could have succeeded where others had failed. "Tell me, human," Drakthul continued, "how did you defeat the storm? Worm?" Before Quan Ho could answer, another voice spoke from the crowd. He did not defeat it alone. A tall Cathani hunter stepped forward. Quan Ho did not recognize him, but the scars on his arms marked him as a veteran of many battles. His eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had seen too much death. "I am Krex Dar, 3rd hunter of the Eastern clans," the warrior announced. "I witnessed the battle from the ridgeline above. This human did not face the storm worm in honorable single combat. He used tricks and deception. Worse, he received help from others." The murmurs in the hall grew louder and more agitated. Quan Ho felt his stomach drop. If the Cathani believed he had cheated, everything would be lost. "These are serious accusations," War Chief Drakthul said, his voice deadly quiet. "Krexdar, explain what you saw." The Valak warrior was fighting the storm worm when this human and Veltar arrived. Instead of allowing the trial to proceed as tradition demands, they interfered. The human used some device to redirect the creature's lightning breath, allowing the Valak to strike the killing blow. "And this offends you how?" Gorthak stepped forward, his massive frame towering over even the tall Cathani warriors. "The human saved my life. Is that not honorable?" "It is interference," Krexdar snapped. "Each representative was to face the trials alone. By helping each other, you have violated the sacred laws of the hunt." "What sacred laws?" Veltar limped forward, using his spear as a crutch. "The law that says we must watch allies die when we could save them? The law that values tradition over compassion?" A dangerous silence fell over the hall. Every warrior present understood the implications of Veltar's words. He was not just defending Quan Ho's actions. He was challenging the fundamental beliefs of Cathani society. "Veltar," War Chief Drakthul's voice held a warning. "You have already been disciplined once for showing weakness. Do not make the same mistake again. It was not weakness then, and it is not weakness now." Veltar straightened despite his injured leg. "This human showed more courage in 7 days than most warriors show in a lifetime. He faced creatures that should have killed him instantly. He saved my life when he could have left me to die. He defeated the storm worm using intelligence and self-sacrifice." "Using tricks and deception," Krexdar corrected. "Using his mind," Veltar's voice boomed through the hall. "Is intelligence not a weapon? Is innovation not a skill? Why must we limit ourselves to tooth and claw when there are other ways to victory?" "Because that is our way," Krexdar replied coldly. "That is what makes us Cathani. We are hunters, not engineers." He said the last word like it was something disgusting. War Chief Drakthul raised his hand for silence. "The accusations have been made. The defense has been heard, but questions remain." He looked directly at Quan Ho. "Human, did you receive help during your trial?" Quan Ho thought carefully before answering. His words here would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of the entire research mission. "Yes," he said simply. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even Veltar looked shocked by his honesty. "Yes, I received help," Quan Ho continued, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Veltar taught me to read the signs of the forest. Gorthak fought beside me against the storm worm, and in return, I helped them when they needed it." "So you admit to cheating," Krexstar said with satisfaction. "I admit to doing what warriors do," Quan Ho replied. "Real warriors do not abandon their comrades. Real warriors do not watch allies die when they could intervene. Real warriors understand that victory means everyone comes home alive." "Pretty words," Krexstar sneered. "But words do not change the fact that you violated the terms of the trial." "Then let us have a new trial," Quan Ho said, surprising everyone, including himself. "If you believe I am weak and unworthy, prove it. Challenge me to single combat." The hall erupted in shocked voices. A human challenging a Cathani warrior to single combat was unheard of. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "You would face me in battle?" Krexstar seemed genuinely amazed. "You, who needed help to defeat a simple beast?" "I will face you," Quan Ho said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "But not for myself. I fight for the right of my people to be treated as equals. I fight for the principle that strength comes in many forms. And I fight for the idea that honor means protecting those who cannot protect themselves." "War Chief," Drakthul leaned forward on his throne. "And if you lose? Then humanity withdraws from this mission and accepts that we are not ready to walk among the stars as equals." "And if you win?" Quan Ho looked around the hall at the hundreds of scarred faces watching him. "Then you accept that there are many ways to be strong, and you judge beings by their actions, not their species." Krexstar drew his ceremonial blade, a wicked curved thing that gleamed in the torchlight. "I accept your challenge, human. When you die, let it be said that you died with courage, even if you lived without honor." "Wait," Veltar stepped between them. "This is wrong. Quan Ho is injured and exhausted. This is not a fair fight. Since when do the Cathani worry about fair fights?" Quan Ho asked gently. "You taught me that the forest does not care about fairness. It only cares about results." Veltar's scarred face showed anguish, but he stepped aside. War Chief Drakthul stood from his throne. "The challenge has been made and accepted. The combat will take place at dawn tomorrow, in the Circle of Judgment. The human will be given time to rest and prepare." As the crowd began to disperse, Veltar approached Quan Ho with worry in his ancient eyes. "You cannot win this fight through strength," he said quietly. "Krexstar is one of our finest warriors. His blade has tasted the blood of 100 enemies." "I know," Quan Ho replied. "That is why I will not try to fight him with strength." "Then how?" Quan Ho smiled, despite everything. "The same way I have survived everything else on this world, by changing the rules of the game." But even as he spoke with confidence, Quan Ho wondered if he had finally pushed his luck too far. Tomorrow, he would face a master warrior in single combat, with nothing but his wits and a simple knife. Either he would prove that humans belonged among the stars, or he would die trying. Dawn came too quickly for Quan Ho. He had spent the night in a small stone chamber provided by the Cathani, but sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw Krexdar's curved blade gleaming in the torchlight. The Cathani warrior was taller, stronger, faster, and trained in combat since childhood. By every reasonable measure, the fight should last about 30 seconds. Quan Ho sat on the edge of his sleeping mat and examined his simple knife. The blade was barely 6 inches long, designed for cutting rope and preparing food, not for fighting. Trained killers. Against Krexdar's ceremonial sword, it looked like a toy. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. Veltar limped into the chamber, still using his spear as a crutch. The old hunter's face was grim with worry. "How are you feeling?" Veltar asked. "Terrified," Quan Ho admitted, "but ready. There is still time to withdraw from this challenge. No one would think less of you." "Yes, they would, and more importantly, I would think less of myself." Quan Ho stood and secured his knife to his belt. "Besides, someone needs to prove that humans are not weak cowards who run from difficult fights." Veltar was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a small device that Quan Ho recognized immediately. It was his sound projector, the device he had used to confuse the razor-spine prowlers. "You left this in the forest," Veltar said. "I thought you might want it." "Back!" Quan Ho shook his head. "The combat must be with traditional weapons only. Using that would be cheating." "Would it?" Veltar's eyes held a strange light. "Or would it be using your natural abilities, just as Krexdar will use his natural strength and speed?" "What do you mean?" "Every warrior fights with the weapons they were born with. Krexdar has strength, speed, and decades of training. You have intelligence, creativity, and the ability to see solutions where others see only problems. Why should he be allowed to use his gifts while you are forbidden to use yours?" Quan Ho considered this. "The rules of single combat were written by people like Krexdar, for people like Krexdar," Veltar interrupted. "They assume that all warriors fight the same way, with the same tools, following the same patterns. But you are not the same as other warriors. You should not be expected to fight like them." Before Quan Ho could respond, another voice came from the doorway. "The human is right to refuse your gift." War Chief Drakthul entered the chamber, his massive frame filling the doorway. "The combat must be fair and honorable. No devices, no tricks. Just blade against blade, warrior against warrior." "With respect, War Chief," Veltar said carefully. "Fairness is not the same as sameness. Is it fair to demand that a fish compete with a bird in flying? Is it fair to ask a bird to compete with a fish in swimming? This human chose to challenge Krexdar. He must accept the consequences of that choice." "He chose to defend his people's honor," Veltar replied. "Should he be punished for courage?" Drakthul studied both of them with his burning eyes. "The rules exist for good reasons, Veltar. Without them, combat becomes chaos. Anyone could claim that their particular trick or device is simply their natural ability. Then perhaps the rules need to change," Veltar said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. War Chief Drakthul's expression darkened, and for a moment Quan Ho thought the old hunter had gone too far. Then, unexpectedly, Drakthul smiled. "Perhaps they do," he said. "Very well. The human may bring whatever tools he chooses. But know this: if he loses, it will prove that human trickery is no match for Cathani strength. If he wins..." The war chief paused. "If he wins, we will have learned something important about the nature of strength itself." After Drakthul left, Veltar handed the sound projector to Quan Ho. Use it wisely, brother. The Circle of Judgment was a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside. Hundreds of Cathani warriors sat on stone benches, their scarred faces eager with anticipation. At the center of the circle was a flat area of packed earth, stained, dark with the blood of countless previous combats. Quan Ho entered from the eastern gate, trying to look more confident than he felt. The crowd's murmur died to silence as they got their first close look at the human who had dared challenge one of their finest warriors. Krexdar emerged from the western gate like a force of nature. He wore minimal armor, just enough to protect his vital organs while allowing maximum mobility. His curved sword caught the morning light as he raised it in salute to the crowd. The warriors responded with approving roars. War Chief Drakthul stood at the edge of the circle. The challenge has been made and accepted. Combat will continue until one warrior yields or dies. Are both fighters ready? Ready, Krexdar called. Out, his voice full of confidence. Ready, Quan Ho replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Then let honor be decided by strength, and strength by blood. Begin. Krexdar moved like lightning, closing the distance between them in 3 quick steps. His sword swept toward Quan Ho's neck in a killing blow that should have ended the fight immediately, but Quan Ho was not where he expected him to be. The human had rolled to one side at the last second, activating his sound projector as he moved. The device emitted a high-pitched shriek that echoed off the stone walls of the amphitheater. The sound was not loud enough to cause damage, but it was unexpected and disorienting. Krexdar stumbled slightly, his perfect strike thrown off by the sudden noise. He recovered quickly, but not before Quan Ho had gained some distance. "Trickery!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Cowardice!" called another voice. But War Chief Drakthul raised his hand for silence. The human uses the tools available to him, just as any warrior would. The combat continues. Krexdar circled slowly, his eyes never leaving Quan Ho. Clever human, but tricks will only delay your death, not prevent it. He attacked again, this time ready for whatever sounds the device might make. His blade moved in complex patterns, cutting off Quan Ho's escape routes while probing for weaknesses in his guard. Quan Ho retreated steadily, using his knife to parry the strikes he could not avoid entirely. Each impact sent shockwaves up his arm, reminding him that he could not match his opponent's strength. But he was not trying to match it. He was trying to understand it. Krexdar fought like most Cathani warriors, with incredible skill, but following predictable patterns. His attacks were variations on classical forms that had been perfected over centuries. They were beautiful, efficient, and deadly. They were also systematic, and systems could be hacked. As Krexdar pressed his attack, Quan Ho began to notice the subtle tells that preceded each strike. The slight shift of weight that indicated a thrust, the micro-expression that warned of a slash, the breathing pattern that revealed when the warrior was preparing his most powerful attacks. Reading these signs was like debugging code. Once you understood the pattern, you could predict what came next. Quan Ho started dodging attacks before they were fully committed. He sidestepped thrusts that had not quite been launched. He ducked under slashes that were still being prepared. The crowd fell silent as they realized what was happening. The human was not just surviving, he was anticipating his opponent's moves. Krexdar noticed it too. Frustration flickered across his scarred features as strike after strike failed to connect. He began attacking more aggressively, abandoning some of his defensive posture in favor of overwhelming offense. That was exactly what Quan Ho had been waiting for. When Krexdar overextended himself in a particularly vicious downward strike, Quan Ho stepped inside his guard and activated the sound projector directly next to the warrior's ear. The shriek at close range was truly disorienting, causing Krexdar to stagger backward with his hands pressed to his head. Quan Ho could have struck then. His knife could have found the gap in his opponent's armor, ending the fight with a killing blow. Instead, he stepped back and waited for Krexdar to recover. "Why?" Krexdar demanded, lowering his hands. "Why did you not strike?" "Because defeating you was never the point," Quan Ho replied. "Proving something was the point." "Proving what?" "That strength and honor can coexist with mercy." Quan Ho lowered his knife. "I yield." The crowd erupted in confusion. Voices shouted questions and demands for clarification. Some warriors called for the fight to continue. Others argued about what yielding meant when the human could have won. War Chief Drakthul stepped into the circle, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourself." "Human. I came here to prove that my people deserve respect," Quan Ho said. "I have shown that human intelligence can match Cathani strength. I have demonstrated that we can hold our own in combat against your finest warriors. But most importantly, I have proven that true strength includes knowing when not to use it." He looked directly at Krexdar. "I could have killed you when you were disoriented. But that would have made me a killer, not a warrior." "Victory through murder is not victory at all." Krexdar stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he knelt and placed his sword on the ground between them. "I yield as well," he said quietly. "You have taught me something today, human, about the difference between strength and wisdom." War Chief Drakthul looked around the silent amphitheater. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the circle. "The combat is ended. Both warriors have shown honor. Both have demonstrated strength. And both have taught us something valuable about the nature of courage." 3 months had passed since the trial of Claws, and the research station on Kethvar was finally taking shape. The facility was built into the mountainside like a Cathani settlement, but filled with the advanced equipment that Dr. Boram's team needed for their work. Human engineering and Cathani architecture had combined to create something entirely new. Quan Ho stood on the observation deck, watching the sun set over the crimson forest where he had nearly died. The burns from his encounter with the storm. Wyarm had healed, leaving only faint scars on his arms. But the changes inside him ran much deeper than any surface wounds. "The latest supply ship arrived this morning," Dr. Boram said, joining him at the railing. "Captain Zorel sends his congratulations on the successful establishment of the station." "Does he?" Quan Ho smiled slightly. "I suppose my engine modifications do not seem so primitive anymore. The fuel efficiency improvements you designed have been implemented across the entire research fleet. The Galactic Council is calling it the Terran Innovation Protocol." Boram leaned against the railing. "You have become quite famous throughout human space." "Fame was never the goal. I know. But recognition has its uses. The Council has approved funding for 12 more joint research stations. They want human engineers working alongside other species on every project." Before Quan Ho could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. Both humans rushed to the command center, where they found chaos. Warning lights flashed on every display, and the communications board was alive with urgent messages. So Jin, the communications officer who had transferred from the New Horizon, looked up from her console with fear in her eyes. "We have a problem. Long-range sensors are picking up an unidentified fleet approaching the system. Configuration suggests pirates." "How many ships?" Boram asked, taking command with practiced ease. "At least 20 vessels, mixed classes but all heavily armed. They will reach Kethvar orbit in 6 hours. Quanho felt ice form in his stomach. The research station had minimal defenses, designed for scientific work rather than military action. Against 20 pirate ships, they would be helpless. "Can we evacuate the station?" he asked. "Not in 6 hours," Sojin replied. "The nearest transport ship is 2 days away." "Then we fight," said a familiar voice from the entrance. Veltar limped into the command center, followed by Krexdar and a dozen other Kethani warriors. The hunter's leg had healed well, but he still walked with a slight limp that reminded everyone of the price of their friendship. "Fight with what?" Boram asked. "We have no warships, no weapons capable of engaging spacecraft." "We have something better," Veltar said. "We have each other." Quanho understood immediately. "You want to coordinate our defense. Kethani tactics and human technology working together." "Exactly. The pirates expect to find a defenseless research station. Instead, they will find a fortress defended by the finest hunters in the galaxy and the most innovative engineers." "What do you need from us?" Boram asked. Krexdar stepped forward. "Your people understand systems and technology. Our people understand hunting and warfare. Together, we can turn this station into a trap that will destroy any fleet foolish enough to attack it." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of desperate preparation. Human engineers worked alongside Kethani warriors, combining advanced technology with ancient hunting wisdom. They turned the research station's scientific equipment into improvised weapon systems. They used the mountain's natural caves to create hidden defensive positions. They turned the station's own infrastructure into a maze of traps and ambushes. Quan Ho found himself in the center of it all, translating between human technical language and Kethani tactical concepts. His months on Kethvar had taught him to think like both an engineer and a hunter. "The main landing bay can be rigged to overload its power systems," he explained to a mixed group of humans and Kethani. "When the pirates try to dock, we can create an electromagnetic pulse that will disable their smaller ships." "And the larger vessels?" asked Krexdar. "That is where your hunters come in. If we can board their ships during the confusion, we can take control from the inside." "Boarding actions in space?" One of the Kethani warriors looked skeptical. "That is not traditional hunting." "Nothing about this situation is traditional," Veltar pointed out. "We must adapt or die." As the pirate fleet entered the system, Quan Ho stood in the command center with his unlikely allies. Humans and Kethani worked side by side, monitoring displays and coordinating defenses. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just a few months ago. 23 ships confirmed, Sojin reported. "They are demanding surrender and threatening to destroy the station if we resist." "Let them threaten," Veltar said grimly. "Threats are the weapons of the weak. The first wave of pirate shuttles approached the station's landing bay exactly as predicted. As they prepared to dock, Quan Ho activated the electromagnetic pulse he had rigged from the station's power systems. The blast disabled 6 small craft, instantly sending them tumbling helplessly through space. But the pirates had expected some resistance. Their larger ships began bombardment immediately, plasma bolts slamming into the mountain face around the station. The Cathani architects had built well. The rock absorbed most of the impact, but the station shook with each hit. Phase 2, Quan Ho announced into his communicator. Hidden throughout the mountain, Cathani hunters activated devices that Quan Ho had never imagined building. They were part weapon, part transportation system, and part insanity. Using the station's matter transporters and some very creative engineering, they had created a way to beam armed warriors directly onto the enemy ships. It was dangerous, untested, and completely against every safety protocol Quan Ho had ever learned. It was also the kind of desperate innovation that only worked when brilliant minds were pressed to their absolute limits. The first boarding party materialized on the bridge of the pirate flagship. 12 Cathani warriors, led by Krexdar himself, appeared in a flash of light among the startled pirates. The enemies had been expecting a traditional space battle, not armed hunters materializing in their command center. The fight was over in minutes. Similar scenes played out across the pirate fleet as more boarding parties struck ship after ship. The pirates had superior numbers and firepower, but they had never faced an enemy that could appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. Within an hour, half the pirate fleet was under Cathani control. The remaining ships, seeing their situation, was hopeless, tried to flee the system, but Quan Ho had one more surprise waiting for them. "Now, Sojin," he said quietly. The communications officer activated a signal that Quan Ho had hidden in the station's routine transmissions. Throughout the battle, every pirate ship had been receiving data uploads disguised as normal communication, static. Now that data activated, turning the pirates' own navigation systems against them. The fleeing ships found themselves unable to jump to hyperspace. Their engines shut down. Their weapons powered off. One by one, they drifted helplessly in space as Cathani boarding parties secured them. When the last pirate ship was captured, silence fell over the command center. Then Veltar began to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that filled the room with joy. "Incredible," he said, clasping Quan Ho on the shoulder. "You turned their own ships into prisons." "We turned their ships into prisons," Quan Ho corrected. "This victory belongs to all of us." News of the battle spread throughout the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. The story of humans and Cathani fighting together as equals captured the imagination of species everywhere. It became a symbol of what could be achieved when different peoples worked together instead of apart. Captain Zorl arrived 2 days later with a fleet of Galactic Council ships, expecting to find wreckage and casualties. Instead, he found a functioning research station and 23 captured pirate vessels. "How is this possible?" he asked, his large Nethys eyes wide with amazement. "Engineering," Quan Ho replied with a smile. "And friendship." The Galactic Council's response was swift and decisive. They declared the defense of Kethvar a model for interspecies cooperation and ordered similar partnerships throughout Council space. Human innovation would be paired with the unique strengths of other species on every major project. But for Quan Ho, the real victory was smaller and more personal. 6 months after the battle, he stood once again on the observation deck of the research station. The facility had grown into a small city, with humans and Cathani living and working together as true partners. Children from both species played in the courtyards, learning each other's languages and customs. Veltar joined, him at the railing, no longer limping. His leg had healed completely, though he claimed the weather still made it ache sometimes. "Any regrets?" the hunter asked. "About what?" "About leaving your engine room. About coming to this world of predators and dangers." Quan Ho thought about it. He could have stayed on the New Horizon, accepted his place as the despised human engineer, who was barely tolerated by his shipmates. He could have spent his life being reminded that humans were weak and primitive. Instead, he had found something he had never expected to find among the stars. "No regrets," he said finally. "This is where I belong.